A touching tribute for a slain police officer last night at the Republican National Convention. It was delivered by the widow of retired St. Louis police officer David Dorn, who was killed by looters as he tried to protect the business of a close friend during the riots that rocked that city back in June.
The alarm that went off the morning of June 2nd was for real. It was a violent night in St. Louis. 4 officers were shot. Others were hit with rocks and fireworks. At least 5 businesses were damaged, looted or set on fire. As I slept, looters were ransacking the shop. They shot and killed David in cold blood, and then live streamed his execution and his last moments on earth. David's grandson was watching the video on Facebook in real time, not realizing he was watching his own grandfather dying on the sidewalk. David is never coming back to me. He was murdered by people who didn't know and just didn't care. He would have done anything to help them. Violence and destruction are not legitimate forms of protest. They do not safeguard Black lives. They only destroy them. President Trump understands this, has offered federal help to restore order in our communities. In a time when police departments are short on resources and manpower, we need that help.
It was an emotional speech, and here to give us her analysis of this situation is After Hours producer Kara McKinney.
Thank you, Alex. So I want to start by quoting Ann Dorn, who we just heard from, because she ends her testimony in a very powerful way when she says we need more Davids in our communities, not fewer. This is such an important point that keeps getting lost because we always hear about how the Black Lives Matter movement doesn't pay attention to people like Officer David Dorn because it goes against their narrative. While that's true, it's only partially correct. So we need to understand why it goes against their narrative in the first place. These BLM and Antifa agitators aren't rioting in the name of David Dorn and others like him because they can't relate to heroes. The idea of living a life of hard work and sacrifice in which you're a benefit to society instead of a parasitic commie leech is completely foreign to these rioters. The Black Lives Matter movement has nothing to do with Black Lives Mattering. It's a movement of evil and selfish people of all colors who are green with envy and who covet their neighbors' goods. That's why it's no coincidence that the 2 men killed earlier this week in Kenosha, Wisconsin, each had long criminal rap sheets. According to investigative journalist Andy Ngo, quote, Joseph Rosenbaum, 36, was the first one killed. Video allegedly shows him chasing the teen shooter and throwing something at him. Rosenbaum was a registered sex offender for a sex crime involving a minor. I guess you could say he died doing what he loved most, chasing minors. I wish I could say I came up with that one. But anyway, Rosenbaum was reportedly caught on film earlier in the night, taunting armed civilians and telling them to shoot him. So according to a breakdown by the New York Times, someone in the crowd fired 1 shot into the air as 17-year-old Kyle Rittenhouse, the suspected teen shooter charged with murder, was allegedly being chased down by Rosenbaum.
Them is white boys. Yeah, that's Antifa, man. Oh, we got a gun, baby. Oh, they you. Oh, he shot him.
So Ngo continues, quote, Anthony Hubbard, 26, was filmed chasing down the armed teen and hitting him when he was on the ground with a skateboard. He has a criminal history that includes charges of battery and repeat domestic abuse. And now we get to the 3rd man who was shot but was able to survive the night. He was, quote, filmed chasing after the teen with a pistol. He was shot at close range in the upper arm. He has a criminal record that includes being intoxicated with and armed with a gun. A friend pictured with him in the hospital says, quote, Gage regrets not being able to kill the teen. Here's the moment those 2 close in on the teen after he falls down to cries of the mob yelling, get him, and beat him up. Now, none of this is surprising. Just last month in Portland, Oregon, a suspected Antifa militant and convicted pedophile, see a trend, was arrested for allegedly stabbing a black Trump supporter. The knife-wielding suspect was later bailed out by an Antifa-linked group. Now, do you really think all these pedos and domestic abusers who don't lose any sleep when it comes to victimizing and traumatizing women and children are really that concerned about other moral issues, such as racial injustice? Isn't it more likely that they're using the movement to abolish the police for their own selfish ends, so they can continue to be criminals in peace without the long arm of the law bearing down on them? But what the left doesn't realize is that once you make the Frankenstein monster or release that genie from the bottle, all bets are off. The mob can turn on you too. President Trump recently making that point in Arlington, Virginia.
If our opponents prevail, no one will be safe in our country, and no one will be spared. No one will be spared, including the people that help fund. They think they're going to be best pals. They're not going to be best pals. They'll be terminated just like many others. I'm the only thing standing between the American dream and total anarchy, madness, and chaos. And that's what it is. I'm representing you. I'm just here. And I'm not sure it's an enviable position, but that's what it is.
I mean, think about the kind of people BLM and Antifa are practically hero worshiping. Just to name some of the most recent cases, we have George Floyd, Rayshard Brooks, and now Jacob Blake. Floyd did hard time for holding a gun to a woman's stomach while his buddies ransacked her house. Brooks was convicted of domestic violence. And now we have 29-year-old Blake. He had police called on him this past weekend because his girlfriend said he was trespassing at her house and had taken her keys. The reason why this is so important is because he had a warrant out for his arrest on charges of domestic abuse and sexual assault. According to a criminal complaint filed against him last month, Blake is accused of entering his girlfriend's home on May 3rd, where he allegedly sexually assaulted her while she slept before stealing her car and debit card. So I guess that's fine by leftists, but the moment cops show up to put a stop to the abuse, that's the injustice. We now know that Blake was armed with a knife that was found on the driver's side floorboard of his vehicle. But apparently that doesn't matter anymore because due process is dead. Here's the Wisconsin Lieutenant Governor saying we don't need an investigation to know that Blake's shooting follows a long pattern of violence perpetrated against black men by cops.
But as the governor said, DCI's investigation is ongoing, but we don't need an investigation to know that Blake's shooting falls in a long and painful pattern of violence. And this is a pattern of violence that happens against black lives too often across this country. And as you all know, we saw even more gun violence unfold on Tuesday night when 2 protesters were tragically killed and 1 other injured by gunshots. Someone that wasn't looking to keep peace, an outside agitator, someone who came in from Illinois with a long rifle, was able to just walk the streets freely like that's something normal that we should just come to expect.
So as you heard at the end there, the 17-year-old we talked about earlier tonight is getting the McCloskey treatment by authorities. The message from Democrats on this is loud and clear. No one is coming to help you when your city's burned. And if you try to defend yourself, you're the bad guy who's going to get locked up. So here's Rittenhouse before the shooting, explaining to reporters from the Daily Caller why he decided to come out that night.
What are you doing out here? Obviously you're armed and you're in front of this business we saw burning last night, so what's up?
So people are getting injured and our job is to protect this business, and part of my job is to also help people. If there's somebody hurt, I'm running into harm's way. That's why I have my rifle, because I need to protect myself obviously, but I also have my med kit.
If only he said he was there to bust in some window shops and steal a couple of cash registers. We'd be having a much different conversation right now. So meanwhile, there's also some interesting developments when it comes to the original case which set off these riots in the first place. I was on After Hours about 2 weeks ago laying out the George Floyd case in great detail, especially when it comes to the neck restraint, so I'm not going to spend too much time on that portion. Instead, you can watch that deep dive on the One American News YouTube page. So for our purposes tonight, let's focus on the explosive and possibly exculpatory evidence released this week by the Hennepin County Medical Examiner listed as AB. It reads in part, quote, where it says hospital blood, those samples are from Mr. Floyd's hospital admission and were not acquired at autopsy. AB said that these samples are better for determining actual blood toxicity than samples taken at autopsy. It shows 11 nanograms per milliliter of fentanyl. AB said that's pretty high. This level of fentanyl can cause pulmonary edema, which means the filling of the lungs with fluid. Mr. Floyd's lungs were 2 to 3 times their normal weight at autopsy. That is a fatal level of fentanyl under normal circumstances. So we knew that Floyd had potentially fatal levels of fentanyl in his system at the time of the arrest. But what is new is that the autopsy found physical evidence of an overdose. The problem here for prosecutors is that while Floyd's death may not have been under normal circumstances, the original autopsy found no physical evidence of strangulation or asphyxia, despite the use of the neck restraint, which is department protocol for suspected excited delirium cases such as Floyd's. This corresponds to the signs and symptoms of a fentanyl overdose that Floyd was presenting when he first encountered the police, including foaming at the mouth, erratic behavior, saying he couldn't breathe even when he was standing up, and finally becoming unresponsive. In a new filing from a lawyer representing one of those accused ex-officers, the defense attorney argues that Floyd may have unintentionally killed himself by his own actions that day, regardless of the type of restraint used by officers.
3 nanograms can kill you. He had 11. And if you look at the body camera closely and the close-ups that we submitted in our second memorandum, you will see that there's a white substance on the back of his tongue. He turns his head to the right, he looks back, and the substance is gone. And our position is that that white substance was the fentanyl on him.
Well, that's going to do it. That's going to do it for me tonight. I'm going to hand it back over to Alex.
Kara, thank you very much. Very interesting stuff, and something tells me that this isn't the last we're going to hear about any of those cases. So stay tuned. You're going to be needed in the near future. Thank you, Kara.
Thank you.